Just give a very quick summary for those who are here. So the great benefit we have is I'm very lucky. My name's Ben, by the way, Ben King. I'm very fortunate to be a mentor on One Day. Eamonn, who actually introduced me to One Day before, is an investor in One Day as well. But the purpose of what we hope for everyone to take away tonight, whether you're part of the One Day program already and building your business and through the MBA, or if you've sort of come back in having had a conversation with the team before and sort of recognise, okay, maybe this is something I might want to look at again. What we want to try and give you is much of an insight into the questions and considerations that every sort of startup founder should be having right at the beginning of their journey. And the reason why Eamonn is so perfect for this, as we'll go on to, as he'll be able to sort of describe in his introduction, is Eamonn has seen more businesses start than you or I will have had hot dinners. And I can say that because my entrepreneurial journey started with this man on your screen, and with a big picture of Tuscan Raider back in 2018. When he was the managing director of Techstars London, and was very generous, especially from Techstars' perspective, to bring us into the program there. So what we'll hopefully, as I said, you'll come away with some sort of insight. It's not over the top sort of flashy rubbish. It's real genuine insight, which will be peppered from experiences and precedent, and hopefully you get as much out of it as possible. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you can, and we'll make time intermittently. But to kick us off, my friend, give us a little intro into you.
Yeah, thank you again for having me, and it's great to at least virtually meet everyone. So my name is Eamonn. I'm I guess recovering founder, and probably future founder before too long again, and an investor in companies around the world. So my journey as an entrepreneur started about, depressingly now, 20 years ago. So I'm originally from Ireland, grew up in Dublin, studied computers when I was younger. My dad bought a computer for me when I was a kid, and I kind of learned how to code on that. But soon my life got kind of sidetracked by trying to be a musician and do lots of other things. And the computer fell by the wayside. I ended up actually studying journalism in college, but had always kind of stayed interested in what was happening online. We had an early kind of connection to the internet, was early user of IRC and a bunch of different channels, and was fascinated by it. And after I graduated in journalism and started working in the industry, I ended up working for the Irish equivalent of the BBC, the national broadcaster back home. And they were a very old school institution, right? Bear in mind, this was 2002. And I was saying to them, hey, we should be going online, we should be blogging, we should be podcasting, we should do all these things. And they weren't really that interested. Just after the kind of internet crash of 99, 2000. So at the time, a lot of people in the media industry thought this is all rubbish. It's not going to go anywhere. But it was a trip. Two friends of mine were teaching English in Korea, and I flew over to visit them in 2004. And I remember just being fascinated by the kind of media landscape over there. So I remember being in a supermarket one day, or in a shopping mall, I should say, one day, and there were a bunch of people crowded around a TV screen watching something. And in this part of the world, you would assume it's, like the Denmark-England match that just finished, right? It would be sports event, but it was people watching StarCraft being live streamed, a StarCraft video game championship. And on the subway, I saw someone using a phone that looked an awful lot like this, bearing in mind that at the time I had a Nokia 3310. I think predictive text was about as new as it got for me. And I remember seeing this person watching a video on their phone and doing, I don't speak or read Korean, but it looked a lot like they were sending an email. And I came away from that and came back to Dublin going, all that stuff that I thought about the internet being big is total rubbish, right? Like, I was so wrong. This phone is going to be bigger than anything that's ever come before it. And so, like an idiot, I went and pitched my bosses in the national broadcaster back home, who were not interested in mobile phones and what they could do. And I got really frustrated. And actually, we'll come back to this later, the best companies I started were ones that started because I was really annoyed. But I was pissed off that they wouldn't listen. And so myself and a friend of mine started a company doing stuff for phones, initially making video content and doing podcasts. And we worked with lots of different kind of big brands and actually a lot of sports organizations. Initially in Ireland, opened an office here in the UK. Did a lot of work out in Dubai, started building iOS and Android apps a couple of years later when those platforms came online, and that business became pretty successful pretty quickly. And we literally didn't have a clue what we were doing. Like, there were about 10 other entrepreneurs in Ireland at the time, and they were all building buildings rather than building software. So we really kind of made every mistake under the sun, which was stressful at the time, but I recognize now it was actually pretty good learning experience. So built that business. We had a hard time. The financial crisis really kind of handed us our asses, especially in Ireland. We lost probably about 90% of our business in the space of 6 weeks. Lost a pretty substantial chunk in the UK, but the Middle East office we had kept us going. So we ended up selling that company, and then some friends and I started a Facebook games company, which we can talk about later if you want. But we were also very fortunate to scale that quickly and sell it to the folks from GameStop, which was again a whole other experience we can talk about. And then I was like, okay, I started 2 companies because I was annoyed. Now I want to start a company because I want to make money. And so I decided which industry can I make the largest amount of money the fastest in the shortest period of time. And again, showing my lack of knowledge, I was like, education. Lots of people need to learn things. Like, surely they'll be willing to pay for it. And I wasn't a great student. I was never really a teacher. I didn't know anything about education, particularly didn't know anything about the K-12 US education system, given that I'd never taken SATs or gone to school over there, but we decided to target that market. And so that whole company was a car crash and a learning experience in the value of customer discovery and founder market fit and lots more. But the upshot of all of that is that I was like, okay, well, I'm going to run out of good ideas. Thankfully, because we had been at least reasonably successful, lots of other founders started kind of reaching out going, hey, how do I open an office in London? Or what do I do if I want to go to the US? Or how do I do sales? So I was helping a lot of other founders kind of as a advisor or just a sounding board or a therapist for them. And through that, I met the folks from Techstars, who were big global accelerator. So they invest in hundreds of companies every year and put them through these kind of 13-week accelerator programs. And I loved it, mentored on a few of those programs, invested in 1 or 2 companies that went through them. And it was the closest thing to starting a company as I'd ever found. So you work really closely with the founders, you spend kind of day to day with them in the office for a couple of weeks, but you get to go home and go to bed at night, and you don't sit at this, staring at I mean, I could draw you a map of the ceiling of my old bedroom when I was running companies, because you spend a lot of time awake worrying about things. This was all of the kind of upside without the lack of sleep. And so ran Techstars for a lot of years in New York initially, then in London, invested in about 70 companies through Techstars. Set up a local kind of investment fund, initially called the Fund, now part of Everywhere Ventures. So we invested in lots of companies across Europe. And I'm a partner at a venture fund based in Estonia now, investing in that part of the world. So I've invested probably in about 100 companies, a little over, probably 110 or 115 now, around the world. So Asia, Africa, US, Europe. So I'm just waiting on Antarctica and Australia, and then I'll have collected every continent. So yeah, and South America. That's an important one, but we'll get to that eventually. So yeah, that's me in a very long-winded nutshell. Apologies for the rambling.
Have you ever invested in a company in Ireland?
Not for a really long time. I had like an inbuilt bias against Ireland for some reason. I was just like, oh well, if you're a good company from Ireland, you'll just automatically go to the UK or you'll go to the US. I think, to be fair, the Irish ecosystem's gotten a lot better. Like when we were starting out, we had the early, like Microsoft were there and Dell and a couple of the kind of old kind of big computer companies. Obviously now we've got like everyone from kind of Meta and Twitter and Google and LinkedIn. But those companies had kind of golden handcuffs on everyone. So the really good talent, well, there were 2 problems. One was mostly those were sales offices. There wasn't very many. Now that's changed. The Google office in particular and Facebook or Meta have a technical element, but those guys were getting paid so much money, and we were kind of like, hey, you want to come and work for peanuts? We don't know what we're doing, and our office is a picnic table in this guy's back garden in the suburbs. The Google office had like a swimming pool, like its own swimming pool. It wasn't just near one. So it was very hard to compete. It's a little bit better now. Ireland is obviously doing a lot better. I think we're like the richest country in the world or something at the moment. Doesn't feel like that when you go there.
There we go. No, nor does it feel like that when I go home to Wales. So look, what we want to try and do is in the time we've got today is to give everyone as much of a flavour, because you had quite a unique, I'd say, perspective as a perspective of all of these different businesses, not just to hear about the success stories, because I think too often like entrepreneurialism is celebrated as like it being the best thing since sliced bread, but no, in statistics, the majority of people aren't successful. But then there probably are, you will have seen, if anyone, been able to find characteristics or attributes that have defined successful individuals and businesses, and then those that may not have, or that might have had great potential, but not necessarily gone to realise it. And I think for everyone who's watching today, especially if they're at that inception part of their business, it'd be great to sort of delve into that. And I think, you know, the question that often comes up in whether for those who are running through the program at the moment, or who we interview to potentially come onto the program, probably I reckon 2/3 of the conversation ask around, you know, can you help me get investment? Can you help me get investment? And I think one of the huge advantages that we had at Pesky when we were going through Techstars with you was that you sort of get you sort of have a bit of a cocoon to the real challenges of what it's like to raise money. And I think, you know, trying to give, if we can try and give people as much of a sort of dot to dot of what they might want to consider or might have ready at the point where they come to determine the investments needed for them, and therefore what the steps are. So hopefully we can cover all that in the sort of, what have we got, 45 minutes. But my first question is, of all the companies, it doesn't have to be one, and it certainly doesn't need to be Pesky, that's for sure. Of all the companies that you've worked with, which are the ones that you're the most proud of?
I think they're ones that have kind of benefited people in some way. I will say the most meaningful experience I had as a founder was we ran this business called Farmville. It was a parody version of Farmville that ran on Facebook, and anyone who played Farmville will know it was very annoying and very cutesy and very nice. And we'd made a version of it that was where you could be really horrible to people, so you could salt the earth on their land or burn down their barns or give their cows mad cow disease and various different things. So it was a horrible thing to do, but it was fun, right? And this was kind of 2010, 11. So the world was kind of coming out of the last recession, but it was still pretty rubbish. And like, you know, that business did extraordinarily well. We went viral. You know, all of the things that you want to have happen with a company happened by accident, largely, I should say. It wasn't like we were amazing. But the thing that mattered the most was getting letters. Like, we would get emails from people, not physical letters, saying, I had a really shit day at work. And I came home, and for the first time in a week, I played this game and I laughed. Like, for 5 minutes, I laughed. And that, you kind of think, wow, you know, because I'd experienced it, right? We'd gone through the financial crisis with all of the lows that brought in terms of having to lay people off and various different things. So you recognize the importance of having a laugh or having a moment of levity in a period of time that's not peppered with lots of those. So I think the thing that meant the most to me when I was investing in companies was having similar experiences and seeing founders who were able to make a dent in people's lives. And so, you know, Ben, you've seen it, the difference that you've been able to make to fishermen, and well, to consumers, right? Like the quality that consumers are getting, the benefit that the fishermen are getting in terms of way more money than they would get from the normal supply chain. I think likewise, the guys from Linguist, who are a language learning company that help you acquire vocabulary a lot faster using AI than Duolingo or Babbel or others. Again, seeing the impact that had on people who were preparing for exams or who were moving to a new country for university and would kind of go, wow, I was so nervous about this. And then I spent 2 months doing this program, and all of a sudden I'm going to move from here to the US, and I have a high degree of confidence. I think those are the ones. So Linguist did that. I think there's a company called Banjo Robinson, which is a cartoon cat that writes letters to children to help them learn how to read and write. And I'm a sucker for anything that does cool stuff for kids, because I have a 3-year-old who's a sucker for cool stuff. But again, hearing from parents saying, I really struggle to get my kid to engage with reading or engage with writing, and actually hear this Banjo Robinson postcard came along, and all of a sudden they're hooked. They're really into it. They want to read every night when they come home. So I think those are some of the ones where you kind of go, wow, this really made a difference to people. Like, of course, there are ones where you go, okay, if this business is successful, then, you know, a chunk of money will come back to me. And that's, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not a shrinking violet about saying that's a positive, but I think the ones where you can really see a meaningful difference like that, even, and we had one of those companies not so long ago where the business didn't work out, but the impact that business had is something that I'm far prouder of than any financial outcome that we could have had. And those founders will start another company, and they will be the better for having gone through the process that they did. And sometimes, look, you touched on investment there. A friend of mine years ago told me, a lot of these VCs, a lot of these accelerators, the reason that they invest is, and I said this, I think probably to you guys on the first day of the program, I'm investing in spite of your idea. Like I'm investing in the people. Usually the earliest stage, like that company, like 30% of the companies on Techstars would pivot during the program. So mostly you're investing in the person. And sometimes it's like, look, I'm investing on the basis that I don't think this company will work. But when you come up with the idea that does work, I want to be the first email that you send. I want to be the first WhatsApp that you send.
So, but that sort of takes me on to, because I mean, I just going through the program in 2018, and I think of a Thomas from Kenco, like when with the two of us are sat next to each other at a very sort of similar position, I'd say, in the business, and now he's knocking on the door of $100 million and all of that jazz. And superficially, that's a fantastic thing, I suppose. But what I the question I've got to ask now is, what can you find? It feels like a vanilla question, but are there attributes, or is there a common thread between founders and the attributes of those founders that generally leads to higher probability of success that you've seen from all of the companies?
100%. So I think the big ones are kind of, I don't want to come across as like some sort of religious preacher here, but the big ones are kind of humility and curiosity, right? The companies that were like, whether it's on Techstars or companies that have gone through Y Combinator or who've raised money from other people that I've worked with or whatever, the ones that have been the most successful are the ones that were the most unafraid to tell you, like to show you the dirty laundry, right? To show you where the skeletons in the closet were, even the kind of super gross looking ones. And they would say, they wouldn't be afraid to admit if they didn't know the answer to a question. Like I make a joke about it, but it's true. It's like the three most powerful words in the English language, especially when you're talking to investors, are "I don't know," because then you go, "I don't know, but can I come back to you tomorrow with the answer, or can I check when I go back to my Google Analytics?" So I think the people who kind of go, "Look, I need," and are specific about knowing what they need help with, and are interested enough to ask, and then who will read the books or listen to the podcasts or watch the videos that you recommend and share, and will kind of come back and tell you how they got on in doing that. I think that's really important, because the mistake that I made, so I mentioned that education business earlier, the mistake I made with that business was I thought that idea was so good that if I said the words out loud, then someone else would instantly steal the idea and run off with it, right? And the reality is, like, there were probably 20 other companies all working on exactly the same idea, all of whom were smarter than me, most of whom had actually gone through the American education system, right? So, ideas are like assholes, right? Everyone has one. Lots of people have kind of very similar ones. And you'll see there's like, you'll see lots of similar ideas come out at the same time, right? Like there were a bunch when Twitter came out, there were about 5 or 6 other versions of these kind of micro posting, micro blogging services that were out there. Likewise, when Instagram came out, TransferWise, plenty of others. The thing that matters is execution, right? And the companies that execute the best are the ones that are like obsessively talking to their customers, obsessively curious about the experience that those customers are having, want to learn how to be better CEOs. Because the thing is, and this is a lesson I learned, I'm pretty good with companies until they get to maybe like 8 or 10 million in revenue, and when they get to maybe 30 or 40 employees. And at that point, I'm not a functional CEO for a company anymore, right? Like I'm good at the small stuff, but when it gets to a point that you have to like actually get involved in kind of financial engineering, or you have to manage, lots of people. I like the bit where you know everyone's name and their birthday and their pets' names or whatever else. The bit friends with Tom, the guy who started Monzo, and he described the moment he knew that he had to step down as CEO of Monzo, was when he went to, they opened a new branch, and he said it was like a royal visit. He got out of the back of the car, someone was there to shake hands with him, they had a special carpet, and he was kind of like, who are these people? Like, it's great that they all work with us, but I don't know, this doesn't feel like my company anymore. So I think good CEOs have to, like the really great CEOs can learn how to do that, right? I'm sure Zuckerberg and his dorm in Harvard didn't imagine being the CEO of a tens of thousands of people strong company, but he learned very systematically. The really good ones do that, and sometimes the really good ones go, that's not the business I want to build, right? Like we spent a lot of time at Techstars, and we can touch on this with VC. Not every company should start with the goal of raising money, and if you raise money, it's a it's a bit of a deal with the devil that you're making, and there are certain expectations that I would have as a VC. That I wouldn't have as an angel investor, for example. And I see the irony inherent in me investing in companies as a person who never raised any money for any of my company. Like, we built stuff that people wanted, we charged them money for it, and when we did that often enough, we hired people who were smarter than us to help us do it better, right? And that was, I think the only external financing we ever got was from Bank of Ireland, and even that was like pulling teeth for 20 grand or something like.
No,
So sorry, yeah, curiosity and humility. Like, you have to. The world changes so much that you, as a CEO or as a founder, you have to evolve. Your business has to evolve, and whether it's kind of thinking about, all this nonsense about Gen AI that's out there at the moment, or thinking about kind of external challenges. Like, the companies that are unsuccessful are the ones who are proud and who suffer from hubris and who don't know who their competitors are or don't care. I'm not saying you should, obsessively worry about your competitors, but you should be aware that you actually have them, and you should have the intellectual honesty to kind of go, I might not be the best company in this space, so I'm going to ask for help.
100%. I think it's something that you imparted into us with Pesky and now with Herd, is that, and it doesn't just go down to the founders. I think it goes down to the way that you look at the people you hire into your business. And I think that the three attributes, three characteristics of which we have separate to let's say their experience, we look at are always grit, accountability, and humility. They've got the grit, and that's why I spend so much time on like personal motivation, because if you don't have that personal motivation, you're not going to have the grit, because you're not going to have the fuel to go through it, and because the majority of the time it's a disproportionately large amount of administration and shit to have to deal with relative to just having a great job and getting a nice cushy pension and all those jobs.
And it's a really dumb thing to do.
It's mad.
Honestly, the stupidest thing. Like, I had a civil service job. I literally could not be fired short of there were three things. I could take drugs live on the air. I could climb the transmission tower outside the RTE building, right? This huge kind of radio tower. And there was something about kind of the third one anyway, we can talk about after the watershed. But they literally couldn't fire me. And so then going and starting a company at a point where, even now with the amount of capital and support and everything else that's out there, it's still crazy, right? Like, it's still really an insane thing to do. And the worst part is, once you do it once, it's really hard to step off. Like, all the people I know who've started companies and even the ones who've sold them and been successful then spend their earnout period in the new company going, what about this? What about this? What about this? Like, we all have notebooks or voice memos or whatever else with ideas.
Definitely, and that's I suppose then the other side. So you're right. Like, it feels like the humility and the curiosity are the fundamental blocks, and it just staying in perpetuity. What are, because I'm sure you would have seen hundreds of individuals, but also with huge potential as individuals and huge potential as businesses that haven't ended up being successful. And what do you feel, or what do you observe as the reasons why they've not been able to realize that potential?
I think a lot of it is ego. Huge amount of it is ego. There is a lot of hype. There has been for the last 10 years, I'd say, about starting companies and being a founder, and that whatever, having stealth startup in your bio on LinkedIn is a thing that can be a boost for your ego. So that's definitely a challenge. I think ego gets in the way of people making good decisions. It gets in the way of people asking questions. It usually gets in the way of them hiring really good people, right? And that's the biggest difference between success and failure most of the time, right? You mentioned Tomas from Kenko earlier. Like, Tomas, I don't think they're now probably close to 100 people, maybe even over 100 people. I'm not sure that he has made very many mistakes in hiring any of those people. There were one or two that needed to kind of move out quickly, but they came in quickly and they moved out quickly. Whereas I look at a lot of other companies and it's like, if you go back over a 5 or 8 year period, they've had like 75% of the team have churned. And I think when you see that level of employee churn, that's a high predictor of failure. So you have to you just have to hire really good people. And usually what that means is hiring people who are smarter than you and not being afraid to do that and not being intimidated by doing that. So ego and arrogance tends to be the kind of biggest predictor of failure a lot of the time. And then, you do see, and this is kind of a related topic, but a lot of founders build products that they want. And so they don't ever consider, what other people might want, or they never talk to enough other people to kind of get that insight. They're just they kind of put the blinkers on, and that's a challenge, right? Like no one builds an amazing product in isolation, or if they do, I've yet to see it, right? So I think that those are the kind of characteristics that I look out for, and a little bit like the New Zealand All Blacks, right? Like never work with arseholes. Like I think that's, even though actually, ironically, if you back some of the Uber guys early on, or others, you probably would have made quite a bit of wage from working with assholes. But the guy who raised the first round for Uber was a guy called Ryan Graves, who's really nice. It was the subsequent rounds where Travis was a little bit more obnoxious, I think. But yeah, I think that ego and arrogance and being unwilling to hire good people. And then the other thing is, for the ones that do raise money, I think a lot of people kind of go they go in one of two directions. So they go too crazy, and they hire, I think the biggest, if anyone ever raises money from a VC, I think my favorite predictor of failure is how quickly a CEO hires an assistant. So it's like you raise $1 million from some VC fund, and then it's like 10 minutes later you have an assistant to help you with the 0 tasks that you basically have on your calendar, but it looks good to get your assistant to schedule your meetings. Or they go in the opposite direction and they're like totally unwilling to spend any money. And I think frugality is good. Like the reason investors invest in your companies, they're giving you money to scale quickly. And whilst I'm not saying hire the executive assistant, I do think sometimes people, I see this in a lot of Northern European and Eastern European companies. Like they kind of go, oh, well, we'll, slow and steady wins the race. And unfortunately, if you raise money from a VC, that's not what they want. That's not what they want at all.
Do you know, when you think about that, and I always think of Chandani from Okwan, who's obviously still doing very, very well, but I think their burn was about £12.50 in a packet of quavers every single month, because they just ran so religiously on keeping the numbers tight. And it's always, I think it's, well, this is a problem that I have even now, sort of having gone through an Icarus moment where I think when I sort of answer the question about myself. Not that I was a high potential founder, certainly, but the difference, the things of which I felt I didn't do at the very beginning were exactly what you said. I had chronic issues with my self-worth, so I never held the people in that business to account, because I was always afraid of leaving them at the time. And because the foundation of the business was really like strong, because that was the bit, the business, I think, was very empathetic, but without that strength and maturity to be able to go, right, well, have real clarity in the way you hire people, but also be very comfortable to move them on if they're not right for you. Like the amount of poison that created in our business at the time was the reason why we were going for the moon, but we ended up having the Apollo 13 moment, and then fortunately managed to save it. But I'd say that was the lack of maturity that I had. And the second part in it, and which sort of comes on to my next question, is I do think, like, you can be brilliant, but if you don't clarify goal in a tangible way, in a measurable way, like, it's very difficult to give people real clean accountability and autonomy to deliver against your journey. Otherwise you end up not being able to delegate, and that I've sort of seen with some brilliant individuals. But I think that the sort of next question, conscious that we're sort of flying through time here, is what do you think are things that founders simply don't spend enough time on at the beginning of the journey? They really should. That may not necessarily be intuitive, but if they don't do it, like, it comes back, they're building up an overdraft that bites them on the bum later down the line. I mean, not to bang the same drum over and over again, but I think a lot of companies, a lot of founders don't spend enough time talking to their customers. Like, that should be a borderline obsession for anyone who's started a company. It should be something that you spend at least, I would have thought, an hour a day or 4 or 5 hours a week doing. And if you look at really successful founders, they still do it, right? Like the Tabbit and Christo, the two founders of TransferWise, were still doing an hour or 2 a week of customer support right the way through to going public, right? And they were doing a lot more than that prior to that point. So I think talking to customers is a big one. I think thinking, understanding what type of business they want to build. So if you want to build a big, venture scale company that's going to get to, 100, 200, 300 employees, starting to think early on about the kind of culture that you want to build in the business. So a friend of mine started a business called Super Awesome, which was bought by Epic Games, the Fortnite folks, not so long ago. And they
initially started out as a subscription box of toys for kids, and then they started kind of pivoting into more software. So eventually they built out kind of this ad network and suite of tools for games companies, publishers, lots of others to create kind of kid safe advertising experiences, which is a regulatory requirement now for anyone targeting kids in the US and Europe with content. I remember they were in a like shitty office in a basement in Bloomsbury. There were two of my really good friends who started the company together. I introduced them, which is my tiny claim to fame, and then failed to invest in the business, which was a really dumb thing to do. But I went in on kind of day 3 of the company to have lunch with them, and I was kind of going, "Oh, what are you working on?" And they were working on culture documents. And I remember at the time thinking, "Okay, how's this going to work?" But they very deliberately thought early on how they wanted to scale the business. What were the types of people? What were the types of characteristics? What were the types of personalities they wanted to bring in? What were the red lines that they were going to have? What were, and I thought that was really interesting. And I've subsequently spoken to a bunch of other people who now run, quite successful businesses. The guys from Mana Aero, who are a kind of big drone delivery company that have raised a pile of money. Again, Bobby, who started that, spent a ton of time early on mapping out, this is the culture, this is the technology, this is how we're going to build, this is our attitude towards build versus buy, this is our attitude versus outsourcing and in-housing. So I think thinking about all of those types of things early on is something that not a lot of founders actually do. And so you end up in this situation where you hire people, but you haven't really got a thought process for how that the hiring structure should look. And so as a result, lots of vendors go, well, I'll hire the first person who's available who used to work at Netflix. They've got to be smart. And actually what they need is like someone who spent 2 years, working at the local convenience store, but is like super passionate about what the subject matter is. So I think those are some things that people don't think about often enough.
Do you think, and this is as you remember, this was I think a challenge for us at the very beginning, is that do you think that people are, or do you notice that some businesses may struggle necessarily to make the necessary momentum because they don't define the metrics that inform value for customers and therefore value for the business? That's something I'm just feeling a lot, is that people talk about the sort of brilliance of their business, but actually cannot validate what are the indicators to determine customer value, and recognizing that your profit is the byproduct of creating value, not the other way around. Like, do you observe that is ever a sort of?
I think that's a function of that kind of customer conversation, right? Like you should be constantly hearing what it is that they like and love and want more of, because again, you as founders will pick, some North Star metric, let's say, for your business on day 1, and on day 3 it'll be different, and on day 10 it'll be different again, on day 30 it'll be different again, right? So I think you've constantly got to have those conversations and think about what are the numbers that really matter, and what are the ones that are kind of accidental byproducts that you don't really need to report on or stress over. And ultimately, look, if whether it's raising angel money or venture money or building a sustainable business, ultimately, like, you have to figure out a way to acquire and retain users and monetize them. And so you've got to think about some metric that relates to all 3 of those things, and then you can start thinking more about success and loyalty and happiness and engagement. But the fundamentals to kind of think about and report on are like growth and revenue, and a function of growth and revenue is how many of the people that come into your funnel stay in there or come back in and repurchase. So, and I think that's the value of doing accelerators or doing programs like one day, is that you get access to a pool of people who've been there and done that before, right? Like, I think whatever about the equity or investment that you get at Techstars or YC or whatever, like, that's not really the point of it. The point of it is this kind of network of mentors or other people that surround you, which is why so many VCs talk about like how they're amazing value add or whatever. Like, most of it is nonsense, but a lot of it is trying to kind of help you. And the reason I love Techstars so much was I wish it had existed in 2004, right? Like, the number of missteps and mistakes that I made just because I literally didn't know what I was doing. Like, there was no book, or there was no Harry Stebbings doing 20-minute VC. I'm not even sure Harry Stebbings was born when I was doing it in 2004, right? So, none of that kind of material existed. And that's why I love these types of programs, because I think they give you, it's like inside baseball, right? Or insider trade, like the legal kind of insider trading, if such a thing exists, because it equips you with the kind of skills and knowledge and a little bit of a cheat code to help you kind of move faster and learn from what other people did in terms of metrics they looked at, or heuristics that they applied to different processes?
100%. I think that was also the reason why, from a personal perspective, having had the fortune of Techstars and having not built a business outside of that infrastructure, that then realizing there was nothing else really in the market that bridged the chasm between people's ideas and their confidence to give them the motivation to actually go and do it. And that sort of felt a bit bananas. And it's certainly something which, I'm very lucky to work with a good group of people. I found that we were just doing it today with a guy called Ed Lau, that as soon as you become, everyone gets very excited about the businesses, but as soon as you can just center in on a metric that will actually validate is very quickly, like, success and failure in your ability to deliver that value, the momentum becomes really quick because you learn really fast. And I think that's whether you learn that it's good or whether you learn it's not, and that's adding the humility and curiosity into that as sort of two necessary ingredients, and it becomes, you massively, I think, mitigate the percentage of risk. Now that you're not going to mitigate it in entirety, but you're going a long way, I think, as a consequence of defining success and failure as sort of starkly in black and white as you can from the very beginning.
You touched on it there, and I think there's an important point there, which I'll make in 10 seconds or less, because I know you've got more questions. But I think velocity is a really important point to make here, right? Like, especially if you're building a company that you want to raise capital for, there has to be real meaningful velocity in your business, and that's velocity in terms of growth or revenue, but it's also velocity in terms of your ability to grow as a founder, to grow as someone who's pitching the business, to grow in terms of the knowledge that you have of the industry that you're in. And the other thing I would say is it's also kind of velocity in decision making. I have seen a lot of companies where there are 2, 3, 4, 5 co-founders, or it's 10 or 20 people in a company, and some people are super passionate about the subject matter. Some people are super passionate about just making money and growing a business. And sometimes you can end up with a company that is actually it's a committee masquerading as a company. Yeah. And you have so many, you have these endless conversations about blah, 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 we're going to do this. And, wouldn't this be so worthy? Ultimately, your job as a CEO is also to make decisions, and make decisions quickly. And if you have, and we've seen this, and hopefully this is a luxury that many of you will get to in the future, where you have 2 or 3 teams, you have your growth team, you have your product team, you have your engineering team, and they all want to go in different directions. Ultimately, your job at a certain point is going to be, this is it. Buck stops here, I'm making the decision, we're going here. And your product manager might go, I'm so sad, or I'm going to leave if you decide to go in that direction. That's it. Decision's made, right? And you wear the success or failure of that decision. But I think the velocity of decision making is something that we frankly do badly in Europe, maybe because we're a little bit more socialist than our friends in the US. We don't believe in manifest destiny quite enough, but I do think that US companies tend to be a little bit faster when it comes to that process and that side of things. I think in this part of the world, sometimes we have a lot more discussion and a little bit less velocity.
I can tell you, so as you know, there's the guy who heads up our operations at Herd is a brilliant guy called Jack Winsbottom. He's a Mancunian guy, and he before he joined Herd, he was the head of TikTok's fulfillment operation, TikTok Shop, and the point here that I was going to want to make is, not only do you need to be the person who's comfortable making decisions at that speed, but actually then finding people in your team who are going to be able to keep at that level, at those gears, where you continuously raise the common denominator rather than bring it down. The difference that it makes is just astronomical. I think that comes back to the earlier points in terms of surrounding yourself with the best possible people you can. Now, in conscious that we've got 20 minutes, what I wanted to do is make sure we're going to jump straight into sort of the investment landscape and everything that sort of Eamonn has learned over the last sort of couple of years, and also projecting into the future. What I suggest, if anybody's got any questions for Eamonn, pop them in the chat now. Give as much context as you want. What I'll do is I'll keep an eye and dive into it. Any questions possible. So feel free to just put it in. It's a brilliant opportunity to speak to a real sort of sage of the sort of startup world. But speaking of, I don't know why I keep getting thumbs up.
I don't know. I was like, are you? The best part is I can't understand if you're giving yourself a thumbs up. Is this like you're your own hype man, basically?
Great point, Ben. I'll remember that.
Well done.
So here's the question which again come back that you get asked the majority of the time is, if I'm, as a founder, if I'm looking to if I recognize I will need to bring external capital and investment into the business, what are the all of the so not every single one, but what do you think are the main considerations that someone like who might be watching tonight, who hasn't been through Techstars, who may not even be on the one-day program, should be considering when they go through that journey?
Yeah. So like, what is, well, I suppose, why do you want to raise the money? What is your goal, and what sort of money should you raise? So if I am an angel investor in a UK company, and I put in 10K into the business, first of all, because of the nature of the tax incentive schemes that exist here, particularly for tech businesses, I can get a kind of write-off on my next year's tax bill as a result of making that. So it massively kind of de-risks the investment. So for a lot of angel investors, if they put in 10K and they get 10K back out a couple of years later, they've actually had a tax break and they've gotten their money back, right? It's a happy day. So if you make a 2 or 3x return for those folks, and they don't pay capital gains tax on the gains that they make, for angel investors, that's great, right? You're making them more money than they would get sticking it into a bank, even at high interest rates. So for angels, that could be enough. Some angels obviously want more, but for most angels, they're like, look, can I get a return? And in many cases, they will be more patient capital. If you want to come and talk to me about a VC round, and I am a big, whatever fund hat I wear, for VCs, and I'll be very specific, right? Because I think that's the most helpful way to do it. Hera Ventures, where I'm a partner, we are a 45 million euro fund. So we 45 million euro, we allocate that into about 25, we've made 28 investments out of that fund. Roughly 60% of the money goes into what we call primary, so the first ticket into a company, and then we reserve the remainder to do follow-on investment. So we put money into one round, and then if that company gets bigger and bigger, more successful, we can put more money into the business. So our expectation is that, like, out of those 28 companies, if we're very lucky, one, maybe two will become really big businesses. So when we put let's say we put £1 million into a company, we lead around, it's a 10 million valuation. So we own 10% of that business in their first round of funding. For that company to become a unicorn, $1 billion valuation, €1 billion valuation, they're probably going to have to go through at least 5 or 6 more funding rounds. So our 10% gets whittled down over time. And by the end of that, you could be left with 3 or 4%. That company then exits for $1 billion. Well, 3% of that is 30 million, right? I haven't paid back my fund with that, so it hasn't been successful. Right? That hasn't even given me a 1x return. For that company to be successful, in my view, to be the real deal, that as we would think about it, that company would need to sell for 3 or 4 billion or go public at a valuation higher than that, because then we would be making 2x or 3x the value of the fund back from one investment. So that's what you have to think going into VC investors. Like, that's the goal that they'll have. And I meet a lot of founders who come and pitch me and they go, oh yeah, in 10 years we'll be making 10 million a year or 20 million a year. That's great, right? That's an amazing business, and you should absolutely build that if that's what you think you can get to. That is absolutely not interesting for me with a VC hat on, because I cannot, the maximum that I would make on a business like that, unless you've got some huge crazy hype factor in there, is you might sell that business for 100 million, which, again, you're the founder, you own 80% of the company, happy days, right? You can buy a walk-in humidor on your yacht. But for me, I'm returning 2, 3, 4 billion to my investors. Like, that's not successful. They won't send me a thank you card for that one. So think about who you're going to go and talk to. And I think Teresa had a question, bootstrapping versus funding. If you can bootstrap as far as you can, that's a positive thing, right? Like, I think you can bootstrap to a point where you go, okay, now I know that I need investment to hire these 3 people that will get me here. That's a very compelling case to go to angels with. And in the current investment climate, I would say that's an even better case to go to angels with than the hope of doing something. And obviously, if you bootstrap a business, all the equity is yours. So even if you bootstrap a business and you sell it for 5 million quid and 5 million goes into your bank account, that's pretty good, right? You sell it for 5 million quid and I've invested, I've probably lost money on that deal. So those are some of the kind of considerations that you have to have. And I meet a lot of founders who spend time spinning their wheels talking to the wrong people. Founders who could build amazing bootstrap businesses, or who could build, start with a side hustle, grow it to pay their salary, grow it from there to there to there, and then, a year, 2 years down the line, raise some money. right? You don't have to raise it on day one. Raise it from a position of power, because we're way better for you. You're going to get diluted. Your ownership is going to get diluted. The terms are going to be better, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, just be wary. There is a lot, whatever TikTok videos or YouTube videos going, oh, like raise money from VCs. It's amazing. A, like not a lot of VCs are investing at the moment. B, you have to pass that bar of, like, generally, if you don't think you're going to be making 100 million in annual revenue within 5 years, then the VC route is probably not for you. You may find some regional kind of oddball VCs, particularly in Europe, where you can kind of get around that a little bit, but mostly, you have to have a big story to tell to raise from venture.
I think that the thing which changed so much since going through Techstars and then afterwards is exactly that. It's understanding the fund arithmetic. I don't think many people understand, like Robbie's in the call now. Robbie and I were talking about this yesterday, where like VC seems like the sort of Valhalla to be able to go and raise capital, but the number of times that you have fantastic businesses that just don't get there, and people see it as like an affront to them. And it's actually not an indictment on their business. And I think that's the bit which people feel like don't worry about it. You just have not found the right horse for this course. And I think that was the difference with as you know, with Pesky, we had buckets of VC money, and I actually think that ended up making me like, I don't think I was mature enough at the time to be able to to manage the consequences of having that much capital, whereas the new business is funded almost exclusively by angels and individuals who have different expectations of return, but are investing in similar levels of money, but they are investing because it's something they believe should exist, and then can continue to not only put capital in, but use their sort of experience in a far more practical way than an analyst might do.
I see you agree with yourself again. No, I think
it's really annoying. You have to chop this stuff off.
I do think it's other people, even though none have shown up on my screen yet, so I'm feeling jealous. But I think the other thing with VC money, I should say, is patience. So angels, you mentioned it there, patience and passion, right? The angels that invested in Herd, they love food, they think it should exist, all of the things that you want to think. With VC, the other thing is life cycles, right? So we have a 10-year fund, which means that once that 10 years is up, we effectively have to either start realizing value on those assets, which means we have to start selling stakes in companies, or ask for an extension. The longest extension usually you get is like 2 years. So if you've got a VC that owns 20-25% of your company, and you took money from them at the end of kind of their active period, you could very easily find yourself in a position 3, 4, 5 years later where they're like, you have to sell this company. I'm going to force you to sell this company because I have these preferences in the terms at which I invested. And if you don't do it, then I'm just going to push it through. And, I need to return some money to my investors. I don't care if you get anything. And it could be a great business. I've seen this happen to people. Great business turning over decent money. They can't buy the investor out because they just don't have enough cash on hand. And so the investor goes, well, let's just sell this for pennies on the pound. So there are big risks with taking VC money, and I say that like with everyone's best interest at heart.
Completely. Now, listen, I've got more questions for you, but I think it's more important that the people who are here get to the opportunity to ask their questions. And if we get the time in the last 10 minutes, then I'll fire mine over. It certainly won't be as pertinent or as good as this. So I'm just going to quickly jump on to Matthews. Is asking, makes the question around, you mentioned quite a high percentage of founders pivoting while in Techstars. Would you know which ones would you say are the better ones that you observed?
Well, I think I invested in Pesky because I wanted the fish myself. I wasn't really interested in the auction side, so it was an accidental pivot that I think the pandemic influenced more than I did. But that's certainly been one of my.
You were the ventriloquist.
I was. Yeah. The Kenko guys, I think we spent a lot of time talking about direct-to-consumer versus retail, and retail has been the transformative thing. Selling into Walmart and Target and big US retailers has taken that company from here to here in terms of revenue, and will continue to skyrocket it. I think the guys from Linguist, again, the language learning algorithm was really interesting, but there's a lot of language learning companies out there. It was the pivot into going, hey, this is a general purpose algorithm for learning anything faster. Like that's a much bigger deal in my view. So those are some of the ones that, and in some cases, as I said with Pesky, it was like a function of global health. With Kenko, it was an accident. Actually, it was someone from Walmart became a customer. Facebook ad became a customer, loved it, got in touch, and we had a big internal discussion about whether it was too early for retail, which it wasn't. So there have been a few that have been pretty. Most of them involve just a change in business model. I'm trying to think if there's one that's been like really. Like I don't think there's been one like the famous pivot is the guys from Instagram, right? They did a location sharing app first that literally no one cared about because Foursquare and Goal and lots of others were out there. And as a final roll of the dice, they said, "Hey, people's photographs look ugly. Let's apply filters and see what happens." So like a huge kind of pivot. And obviously, 11 months later, they were billionaires. 13 months later.
That'd be nice. I think these were billionaires in yen, maybe not in sterling or dollars yet. So the couple of questions that have still come through. So Josh asks, have you discovered any not so obvious indicators that it may be time to pivot, or any advice on finding what to pivot to?
I think a lot of this is kind of, it'll be internal and external discussions. So I think one of the benefits of the process that you went through with Techstars is that you get a lot of sounding boards and a lot of advice from the mentors. So I think you've got to have those conversations with folks. What, any not so obvious indicators that it's time to do it. I mean, someone asked a question about how do you know when a startup has achieved product market fit? It's a little bit like, how do you know when you're in love? You don't know, I can't tell you what it is, but I can tell you what it feels like. It's a little bit similar with product market fit. You find an inflection point where you have had to be pushing the door to get customers or to acquire people or to get people to go from you sign a page to an onboarding page to a kind of testing it out. And all of a sudden that friction disappears and you start seeing more and more people coming through and coming on, and you start seeing positive reviews. It's the same with a pivot. I think there are things that start to happen in terms of looking at your funnel and conversion if you're in B2B, or looking at your kind of growth and retention if you're B2C, that you suddenly start to go, this is just not landing with people, or I feel like I was getting loads of kind of, and it can be soft indicators, like I was getting loads of comments and loads of replies to emails that I was sending out before, and now I'm getting like 10% less or 50% fewer. There's loads of those things that suddenly start to kind of tell you that it's not working. But usually the thing that tells you that it's not working is like people, build a mobile app, people download it and they don't log in, or if they do log in and sign up, they use it once and they never come back. If you're B2B, you have like a book a call that never gets clicked. So you start to see it fairly early on.
I think one of the things which I've observed in just with One Day is, and to a couple of people I work with the One Day, because the question here is like, one of the questions is, do people pivot too early? Often I find that comes back to one of those early attributes we talk about grit and confidence. And I've found in the absence of people getting immediate return, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the best product or service on the planet. Like, something must be wrong, and so therefore I need to go and fundamentally change things. And I think that I observe that a lot. I think that's a product of confidence more than just having the sort of the staying power to just go, right, well, how do we iterate and just work out if this learning is fatal, or actually are we going to throw the baby out with the bathwater here? And I think it's probably, especially if it's your first time doing this, and if you're not necessarily 100% sort of confident that you're going to be the Moses that parts the Red Sea in the startup world, then I actually think that people possibly pivot too early. There is a capacity for people to pivot too early, as much as there possibly is. We know there is the reality that people pivot far too late. Which is nice. I think so. One of the questions, which I think this is one that goes directly to Eamonn, is a startup developing bioluminescent houseplants. Does this sound attractive to an angel investor? So what do you have to say?
Well, I'm an investor and board member in a company called Click and Grow, which is a smart garden company and based out of Estonia. They went through YC a couple of years ago and now have kind of massive international distribution. So grow your own, herbs, vegetables, plants, etc., etc. So actually, I know the home gardening industry pretty well. That is a tough market, I will say, like a very, very, very tough market. I think the angel investor interest in that might be good, just because I think there are a lot of people who are, who really like plants and who really like gardening and who are quite passionate about it. I think it's a venture backable business. It might be a little bit more challenging, just because people have looked at, Aero Garden was acquired by Miracle Grow. There were a bunch of others in that space that haven't been successful. So I think some people may view there being capped upside. And the other big problem with with houseplants is distribution, right? It's actually really hard to send seeds through the mail to different markets around the world for a variety of reasons. So you would either have to then think about, hey, do I get distribution in Home Depot or B&Q or anyone else? But could it work? Yeah, I mean, bioluminescence is amazing. Like, it's really, really cool to see. So I think there is an opportunity.
Fantastic. There's two quick. I think this question that Teresa just asked it's very pertinent. So, do you need an MVP before seeking funding?
I'll give you a very annoying VC answer of it depends. Most of the time, I like to see something, and that the something can just be like a clickable prototype, right? Like a PowerPoint or a keynote that you stitch together, a Figma where you've kind of created the clickable prototype of it. Like that's enough most of the time. I think if you come just with a bare bones, and again, it depends on the idea, but if you're coming with kind of a bare bones, I want to build this, there's not a lot of investors that will go for that. They want to see, some degree of kind of application. And so the MVP is usually the best way to do that.
I will say that I can possibly buck Eamonn's response then, in that we had about 4 customers when Eamonn actually invested in us in Pesky. And the thing, I think the thing that helped us...
I got food poisoning from one of them, thankfully not from you guys.
Fantastic, exactly. That was part of the plan. The part that really helped us at the very beginning of that process was we had a video which we made, and we made it for 500 quid.
Yeah.
And that was something which we knew would try and translate the potential of the business, but actually resonate with the individual, regardless of what stage they were as an investor, but like try and touch have emotional resonance as a consumer. And that sort of, I think, helped us a huge amount in that very early stage, because had it not been for Eamonn taking us on at Techstars, none
Marco,
of it would be possible.
My colleague Marco still sends me that video on the anniversary of us receiving it every year. I think it's like an emotional touch point for him in his life. I love it. But it raises a good point of, like, there is a way to kind of fake it till you make it. Right, I've seen a bunch of people recently who've launched businesses by effectively starting a Substack or a newsletter or a podcast where they talk about their industry, and they start teasing the idea of their business a little bit, or they book it, say, hey, book a call, I want to talk about A, B, and C with you. Like, I think there are ways that you can start creating a little bit of PR, a little bit of buzz, a little bit of excitement about what you're doing without necessarily having to have a product in market. And I think, to the point about bioluminescent houseplants, right? Like, if you can start doing something on Instagram, showcasing those, build a bit of a community, build out a newsletter, get people excited, and then come to me and say, I have 1,000 followers on Instagram, I have 1,000 Substack subscribers, my open rate is 90%, and everyone is emailing me saying, where do I buy these? Great, right? Then you're into kind of more of a take my money conversation with people.
Absolutely. So we've got one minute left, so I want to ask one final question, and this hopefully will be pertinent to someone on this call. If you were going to invest £50,000 of your own pennies at the moment into a sector, where would you put that money?
Well, I mean, I'm biased because I'm really only massively interested in one sector at the moment, and I think that's food. And that's a pretty broad category, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the call, but also because I'm working kind of in that space a little bit more widely as well. So I think there are opportunities to build brands. I think there are opportunities to build communities. I think there's opportunities around content. I think people are really passionate about it, and I think there are systemic global issues around food, nutrition, and all sorts of questions that we could spend another hour talking about. So that's the sector I'm interested in. But I mean, that's not, don't use it. Like, basically no other VC in Europe would give you that answer, because they all think it's a basket case industry to invest in, and they may be right.
Well, I hope they're not. I hope not.
I really hope they're not.
Yeah, I know. Otherwise, that could be it's probably we'll have to find something else to talk about. Listen, thank you so much for your time, and also thank you everyone who's been here. It's incredible to see the people who've attended and to stay the whole course. I hope it's been of value to you, and I, like, regardless of knowing Eamonn as one of my closest friends for 6 years now, I always sort of pick up a nugget in the whispers of the words that he says. So look, if we can help them at any point, then please feel free to reach out to us. I generally hate LinkedIn, but I'm sure that'd be a way that you can get in touch. For those who are on the program, you know, congratulations, and I hope everything's going well. For those of you who were considering the program, please, if you thought maybe previously wasn't the right time and now is, then you know where to go. Go onto the website, get back in touch with people, because hopefully you're seeing that this kind of infrastructure can bridge that gap to take it from an idea to a brilliant business. So thank you so much for everyone's time. Thank you, Eamonn, for your time, and it's wonderful to see you. And I wish everyone the best of luck, and hope our paths cross at some stage.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Good luck. for those of you who start companies, as I say, it's a hell of an adventure and a hell of a learning experience. And going from kind of pipe dream to prototype and beyond is honestly the best thing that I've ever done. Probably the most stressful and painful at times as well. But yeah, it's a really fun journey. And congratulations for even thinking about it. And I look forward to hearing from many of you.
Cheers, guys. Take care. All the best.